This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of Africa Live. We'll be reviewing the major developments and events of the past 12 months. I'm Lindy Mtongana.
And I'm Richard Ntai in Nairobi. Well, Lindy, 2020 started with high expectations, but the world as we know it changed early in the year with the onset of the coronavirus pandemic. We'll be giving you a comprehensive review of this and other major stories of 2020 in Africa and beyond.
Indeed, Richard. But first, let's take a look at stories making headlines today. We start here in southern Africa, where a powerful tropical storm has made landfall near the central Mozambican city of Beira. Now, this happened early on Wednesday, bringing heavy rainfall and wind to the area. Beira is a low-lying coastal city, home to about 500,000 people. The region was previously devastated by Cyclone Idai just 2 years ago, displacing tens of thousands of people. Experts are reporting sustained winds of 85 kilometers per hour, with gusts exceeding 20 kilometers per hour. The storm is said to be moving inland through Mozambique and towards Zimbabwe. Now, at least 26 people have been killed after blasts rocked Yemen's Aden airport on Wednesday. The attack came moments after a plane landed carrying a new unity government. All government ministers were reported to be unharmed, but more than 50 people were wounded. Medical sources say casualties are likely to rise. Some officials said the Iran-backed Houthi movement is behind the attack. Just hours after that attack, local media also reported a second explosion near Aden's Al-Mashek presidential palace. And now turning to a first-of-its-kind investment deal between China and the European Union. The comprehensive agreement on investment was announced on Wednesday by Chinese and European leaders at a virtual meeting. The deal comes after 7 years of tough negotiations. The EU's Trade Commissioner says the long-awaited deal contains the most ambitious agreement that China has ever concluded with a third country. The agreement gives European investors better access to markets and ensures a level playing field in China. It also offers both sides new opportunities in areas like renewable energy and healthcare. Meanwhile, the United States says it will impose additional tariffs on certain European Union products, including aircraft-related parts and wine from France and Germany. Washington did not say when the tariffs would take effect, but it is the latest move in a long-running dispute over subsidies for European aircraft company Airbus and its U.S. rival Boeing. Last month, the EU levied additional tariffs on $4 billion worth of U.S. goods. Brussels' move was authorized by the World Trade Organization in retaliation against the U.S. for its subsidies to Boeing. But Washington says Brussels had unfairly calculated the tariffs, and the U.S. needs to take some measures to compensate for this unfairness. Well, time now for a short break. We'll be back with our special coverage of the year 2020. In our first segment, we'll examine the COVID-19 pandemic in detail, from the initial cases and Africa's interventions to the virus's social and economic impact and the latest on vaccine development. We'll also bring you a recap of some of the other major stories of 2020, those that were perhaps overshadowed by the pandemic but were no less important. Stay with us. Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climate and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories. Let's have a look. We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
I've been Shiwishi, Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice. Right, let's get into the events, the people and places that dominated headlines in the year 2020. Now, it was a year of collective tragedy for the world. The emergence of the coronavirus pandemic changed how the world interacted, traded, and even united to confront a common enemy.
We need only look to the unity of purpose in the search for a vaccine and the moments of victory after breakthroughs were announced to know that COVID-19 will arguably continue to dominate conversations in the coming year and beyond.
Indeed, what a year it's been. But of course, the coronavirus pandemic was not the only story of 2020. Here's Penina Karibe with a look at other major news events that made headlines this year.
Thank you, Richard and Lindy. Indeed, 2020 will be remembered as one of the years that not only shaped the world, but also offered vital lessons, not only in governance and planning, but also in multilateralism. Coronavirus still remains a historical moment that the world will love to forget. Here are some of the stories that shaped this year in Africa and beyond. The year began with many parts of Eastern and West Africa submerged. Rains that had begun in mid-2019 continued wreaking havoc on many households. Hundreds of lives were lost and many people were displaced. In fact, countries such as Sudan and South Sudan are still grappling with the effects of the floods. It brought forth the realities of climate change. In February, Africa reported its first case of the coronavirus, with Egypt being the landing place. The disease has since spread across the continent. Up to now, over 2 million cases have been reported, with over 57,000 deaths. Although this may sound bad, Africa is still considered largely spared by COVID-19, unlike the United States, India, Brazil, Italy and Russia, where it has claimed thousands of lives. In the Sahel, insecurity was witnessed, but more on its effects than attacks. The situation that has been simmering for a while claimed its first regime. In October, Malian President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta was overthrown in a coup orchestrated by young soldiers based in the capital, Bamako. A transitional government has been formed, but insecurity continues being witnessed in the region. Nigeria continues bearing the brunt of Boko Haram and its splinter group, the Islamic State in West African province. ISIL has also spread its wings into the Southern African region, with Mozambique gripped by the militancy. November had two events. A breakthrough was witnessed in Libya, with the warring factions signing a peace deal that is aimed at ending the civil war that has rocked the nation for over 2 years. However, the Horn of Africa erupted. Ethiopian forces began a military operation in the Tigray region. The unrest is still on, and thousands of Ethiopian refugees have moved into the neighboring Sudan. We also had landmark elections taking place on the continent. Countries such as Burkina Faso, Burundi, Comoros, Ghana, Guinea, Cote d'Ivoire, Tanzania, Togo, and others had presidential polls. Internationally, the November 3rd elections in the United States saw one of the rare moments in the nation's history when an incumbent lost. Well, Donald Trump's loss was not only witnessed at the ballot, but also in the courts, where his attempts to discredit the outcome were overruled. Meanwhile, Britain has a few days to hammer out an agreement with the European Union as France grapples with homegrown terrorism. Back to you.
The COVID-19 pandemic dominated headlines across Africa throughout 2020. Governments were forced to introduce strict lockdown measures, and the wearing of masks became mandatory in many places.
Well, furthermore, curfews were imposed and social distancing protocols introduced as countries struggled to curb the spread of the virus. CGTN's Robert Nagita looks back at how the pandemic unfolded across the continent.
This is the defining global health crisis of our time.
By the time the World Health Organization was declaring COVID-19 a global pandemic in March, the first COVID-19 case in Africa had been recorded a month earlier. By the end of March, several African nations had imposed strict measures in an attempt to control the spread of the virus. By then, South Africa had recorded the highest number of cases on the continent.
There is sufficient evidence to show that the lockdown is indeed working.
As April began, China had donated millions of face masks, test kits, and thousands of protective suits to Africa. By the end of May, all African countries had recorded COVID-19 cases, with Lesotho becoming the last country to confirm a case. In June, The first COVID-19 vaccine trials kicked off in South Africa. By mid-July, Egypt and South Africa had the highest number of confirmed cases, accounting for 75% of all new cases reported. In the beginning of August, the number of COVID-19 cases on the continent passed the 1 million mark. As September came to an end, African countries signed up to COVAX, a global initiative aimed at securing at least 220 million doses of the vaccine for the continent. African governments assured their populations over vaccine safety concerns.
Government will ensure that the COVID-19 vaccines to be deployed in the country are effective and are safe.
In November, WHO announced the rollout of COVID-19 vaccines would begin in mid-2021. In December, South Africa announced a rise in infections in the country was due to a new strain of COVID-19. In several countries, little or no data on testing made it difficult to get an accurate picture on the spread of the virus. Only 10 countries, among them South Africa, Egypt and Kenya, accounted for 70% of the total tests on the continent. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, COVID-19 has certainly changed the lives of people around the world. It's had negative political, economic and social effects on all countries, some more than others. Yasser Hakim looks at the socio-economic impact the virus had on Africa.
The COVID-19 is not yet as fierce in Africa as it is in Europe, the Americas and East Asia. Some experts believe that in spite of having less capabilities, many African countries have managed to soften the blow of the pandemic by reacting more quickly than other continents.
What has protected us is the lockdown at an early stage of the pandemic. In most cases, there was a partial lockdown, not total lockdown. And this has meant some businesses continued operating as unemployment rates increased at a slower pace, while growth rates in Egypt, for instance, were higher than IMF expectations at over 3% so far. South Africa saw some growth. Ethiopia and Sudan as well had faster growth rates than expected.
The relative success in Africa was not of its sole doing, but there was huge aid and stimulus packages that come from developed nations and financial institutions such as the IMF. This money was spent on the medical and health sector, on supporting different industries to sustain the effects of the pandemic, and on social welfare programs for the poor. This has provided a shield from major economic recessions or social disturbances during the pandemic. But the African countries have also learned from the Chinese experience.
Number one lesson was the awareness by the Chinese citizens to abide by health regulations and take it seriously. We have learned from that, and it's why COVID cases remained relatively low. Secondly, the Chinese government did not apply a total shutdown of the economy, except in the highly infected areas and cities. It has helped keep the economy going, even if at a slower pace for a while, and the rebound is quicker too.
As we go into a new year, the Chinese lessons have been learned so far. COVID-19 cases are still relatively controllable in Africa, while the economies are beginning to slowly recover. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
When the coronavirus pandemic came to Africa, schools across the continent were closed. This was part of efforts to curb the spread of the COVID-19. The United Nations Education and Culture Agency, UNESCO, describes it as the greatest disruption to the education sector in history. In an effort to mitigate the disruption, classes moved online. This, however, posed a challenge for developing countries, especially those in sub-Saharan Africa. UNESCO reports that an estimated 89% of learners in the region do not have access to a computer at home. All right, let's take a closer look at how African students were affected by the pandemic. We are joined by CGTN's Adel Al-Marroui in Cairo and Deji Badmus in Lagos. Gentlemen, welcome to Africa Live. We appreciate your company. Adel, let's start with you. I really want to get your take on this. Adel, what has been the impact of the coronavirus on learning in the region and Egypt in particular, and how have they dealt with it? Adel?
The first wave was definitely a great shock where no one was prepared. And the shift into digital education has been stumbling a lot. But the second wave has given time for schools to prepare during the summer and the end of the second semester, which many schools were shut. So for Egypt, for instance, the Education Ministry has put all its curriculum on YouTube channels so that it can have global access. And just recently, the government has decided to eliminate all necessities or attendance at schools, so it would give more room for students to attend or not. For private schools, this has been a bigger advantage as they have a higher technological foundation. They are moving on a hybrid basis, and so far some schools have shut due to the extensive infections rate reported there, but overall the education system so far seems to be going on track with no indications that schools will shut down anytime soon.
All right, Adele, your points are well taken. Let's toss it over to Deji in Lagos. Deji, I have one more question for you, if you would indulge me. What has been some of the challenges of adapting to new ways of learning in the region, and how does the future of learning look like after the pandemic? Deji?
Well, Richard, apart from the issue of access that you mentioned initially, part of the problem with adapting is the problem of low computer literacy. So even in a situation where people have access, for instance, to computers or mobile phones, there is still the problem of low level of literacy. So people may not know how to use their computers or even how to use their mobile phones effectively now for online learning. But the truth is that the biggest problem, of course, would be that of access, whether it's access to computers, access to smart mobile phones now, or even access to data. The cost of data in the region is quite expensive. Not many people can afford it. And we saw that during the pandemic. It's the reason why a lot of people found it very difficult to cope. Internet penetration here is still very low. That's also a challenge. So going forward, these are the problems that will need to be overcome before online learning will actually take root here. I don't think it will replace face-to-face learning in this region. It can only complement it, but there's no question at all that the potential of online learning in the region is quite huge, but then the challenges would have to be surmounted, and they are quite huge too.
All right, Deji Badmus, important statements that you've made there as well. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us here on Africa Live. That was Adel Al-Mahroui in Cairo and Deji Badmus in Lagos.
Well, certainly in addition to what we've seen in the education sector, the COVID-19 outbreak certainly tested Africa's resilience. The pandemic's economic fallout caused by disruptions in global and regional value chains and a slump in commodity prices threatened to derail progress the continent has made in recent years. Despite bleak forecasts, African countries managed to mount a concerted response to the pandemic. The World Health Organization says Africa's numerous encounters with outbreaks helped it to cope with the brunt of the pandemic, and of course helped it to cope with the pandemic overall. Well, joining us now to discuss this further is Dr. Richard Mihigo. He's the Deputy Incident Manager for COVID-19's response at the World Health Organization, in particular the Regional Office for Africa. Doctor, thank you so much for your time. Now, we know that the coronavirus pandemic has essentially presented the world with a series of unprecedented challenges. In your view, what has been the pandemic's most significant impact on Africa?
Many things have changed in our day-to-day interaction, not only socially, but also emotionally with our peers, our families, our communities. Beyond that, we have seen a lot of disruption in terms of the economic situation in many countries. Health systems have been heavily affected. Some of the health facility overwhelmed by the COVID-19 patients.
You know, when this pandemic started, there was a lot of concern that Africa's public health systems would simply crumble under the weight of this pandemic. It was anticipated that Africa would be particularly hard hit. And now as we come to the end of the year, what is your assessment of how African countries have actually responded to the coronavirus pandemic?
we had very few countries that had the capacity to detect the COVID-19 virus. Not also to mention the possibility of treating people with severe cases of COVID. So we've come a long way where the laboratory capacity has been improved dramatically. Literally all the countries now in Africa can detect, not only in the capital cities, but throughout the country. The capacity of case management has been improved quite a lot in many countries.
As we look towards 2021, what do you think the way forward looks like, in particular for Africa?
We are expecting that the vaccines are going to get to many of these countries through that mechanism. That is a global solidarity mechanism that has been set up by WHO, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and the CEPI. The objective was really to make sure that Africa, but also other low-income countries, are not lagging behind when the vaccine will start to become available. But WHO is working quite hard with countries to make sure that the vaccines become available as soon as possible. We do expect that by the Q2 of next year, we may start to see vaccine rolling out in countries in this region.
China has approved the Sinopharm coronavirus vaccine developed by the China National Biotech Group. The approval was announced at a news conference held by Chinese health officials this morning. Sinopharm released its phase 3 trial results on Wednesday. It says its vaccine has an antibody rate of 99.5% in participants and an efficacy rate of over 79%. The company says the results meets vaccine standards set by the World Health Organization as well as China's regulators.
Well, of course, for decades now, China and Africa have enjoyed strong relations.
Yes, they have. And despite the COVID-19 pandemic, those ties remain strong. CGTN's Mohammed Abubakar takes a closer look for us.
2020 was a year where the world had to deal with not only the coronavirus pandemic, but a hard-hit economy. Through it all, China and Africa remained partners. Beyond being a partner in Africa's fight against COVID-19, China has pushed to maintain trade. The country hosted the China International Import Expo in Shanghai, where African companies got an opportunity to make deals and establish ties. And when the COVID-19 pandemic started to hit Africa, China stepped in. Chinese companies and individuals donated thousands of personal protective gear to the continent. Medical experts were sent across Africa to share their knowledge on how to combat COVID-19. And now, as the conversation shifts to the COVID-19 vaccine, developing countries are looking to access the vaccines. Chinese President Xi Jinping has pushed for multilateral response, pledging to make Chinese manufactured COVID-19 vaccines available to developing countries. Already countries like Egypt and Morocco have received batches of the Sinopharm-produced COVID-19 vaccine.
We have received the first shipment of the COVID-19 vaccine. This is the first of the air freight supplying us with a vaccine. It's a historic day. We work continuously to guarantee the influx of the vaccine to the Egyptian people. That is thanks to God and thanks to the deep friendly relations between us, the Emirati people and the Chinese people.
Collaboration between mankind is the strongest weapon to face common threats like the COVID-19 pandemic. I am happy to witness this moment. The arrival of the Chinese vaccines from the UAE to Egypt shows that China is always keen on positive cooperation when it comes to the vaccine, whether it's through the development, the production, or fair distribution.
As the world continues to fight the COVID-19 pandemic, China seems set to continue its collaborative relations with the African continent. Mohammed Abubakar, CGTN.
Well, it's all about vaccines as we move into 2021. And despite some skepticism, at least 80% of Africans say they are willing to take a COVID-19 vaccine once it's publicly available and deemed safe and effective.
Well, on that encouraging note, we end our coverage of the COVID-19 pandemic. Time now for a short break. When we return, we take a look at some other major stories of 2020, starting with conflict, peace efforts, and Africa solutions. Stay with us.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Welcome back. Let's now take a look at conflict and peace efforts in 2020. Now, this year, Africa saw some positive developments towards peace and stability. In Mozambique, a peace deal was signed between the government and the main opposition party, Renamo, and a long-awaited border agreement was signed between Sudan and South Sudan.
But various obstacles to peace were also observed in countries such as Burundi, Cameroon, Mali, Libya, Somalia, Ethiopia, and South Sudan.
Well, in this segment, we take a look back at the Libya peace process, the Sudan Peace Pact, and African Union interventions. Here's Adel Al-Mahrawi with more.
2020 began witnessing the widest gap between Libyan factions. The civil war had intensified, with the Western and Eastern blocs attempting to expand their territorial gains. Ceasefire agreements brokered by Russia and Turkey, then later endorsed by the Berlin Conference in January, have all failed. The UN arms embargo on Libya continued to get breached. With Turkey's military support, the government of national accord pushed away the Libyan National Army from Tripoli and kept forcing them to retreat until they reached Sirte. Egypt then surprised the world, threatening a military intervention in Libya, what would have turned the conflict into a regional war.
Sirte and Jufra line should not be surpassed. Neither the eastern forces nor the west or any other force should cross it. Is this a call for war or peace? This is a call for peace, to begin negotiations and end the fighting. We won't enter unless you request it, and we will leave Libya when you order us to.
Egypt's ultimatum has become the turning point in the conflict. Suddenly, the UN's military, political, and economic negotiation tracks have all seen great progress. And a series of meetings in Egypt, Morocco, Tunisia, and Switzerland have led Libyans to open domestic travel and airspace. From Tunisia, the UN announced that Libyans have agreed to hold elections in December 2021.
Libyan women are the biggest winners in 2020. That's because they managed to get a 30% quota in the upcoming government. This comes at a time when women are greatly marginalized in Libya because of its tribal heritage. Another major agreement is to exclude anyone who has taken part of the executive government since 2014 from taking part in the new cabinet.
While that appeared to be a promise to renew blood in the political system, it was also the reason to force talks into stagnation. By December, the rapid news about progress in Libyan talks have started to fade away. Volatility appears to still surround the significant outcomes reached in 2020. There are targets in sight, the road to which, though, remains unclear.
The most prominent challenges in 2021 is that the negotiation tracks produce a transitional unity government. The next challenge will be to prepare for real and free elections. The UN says the elections will be held in December, but there isn't any indication that it will happen. Divisions prevail among all Libyan institutions.
With the oil production resuming, the economic hardships have eased a bit, yet it remains a massive challenge for Libyans in 2021, especially after the UN declared the urgent need to fund the struggling election process. With the political process stumbling on its road to general elections, it appears that holding the ceasefire is the only remaining blessing from 2020, and even that is threatened to collapse. The much-needed step now, which could revive the world's hope in peace for Libya, is the formation of the transitional government. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
South Sudan spent part of 2020 helping neighboring Sudan establish a peace deal. This came after the ouster of former Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir. Sudan's peace deal not only looked to establish a transitional government, but also bring an end to the unrest in the Darfur region. Patrick Oyet filed this report, taking a look at the role South Sudan played.
President Salva Kiir's government says peace in Sudan will also help end violence in South Sudan. The two countries have several of the same political parties. They only split in 2011 when South Sudan became independent. The 2020 peace agreement reached in Juba is expected to end 17 years of wars in Darfur, South Kordofan and Blue Nile. The deal is between the transitional government and a coalition of rebel leaders. Sudan's transitional government says its top priority is ending wars in the country through the peace accord.
Stability in Sudan means peace for all the neighbors of Sudan, particularly for South Sudan. The two countries are connected by so many things, including culture. So security in Sudan is very good for all of us in the East African region. And we as a region are moving towards a new era of peace, justice and development.
The 2020 peace deal is meant to incorporate former rebel groups in Sudan's transitional government. Hundreds of the former rebels will join legislative and executive posts until elections are held. Thousands of former rebel fighters will also join Sudan's military. People displaced by war will be assisted to return to their own homes. An agreed federal system will give more power to local administrations. There will also be land reform and courts to bring war crime suspects to justice. However, two opposition groups have not yet signed the peace accord.
We want a comprehensive peace agreement, an agreement that will address the root causes of the problems in our country. If we don't address the reason that made us take up arms in the first place, then we won't be part of any peace deal. An agreement reached will not bring peace to Khartoum.
Sudan's new government says it wants the country to transition into a democracy with elections scheduled for the end of the transitional period. Several peace agreements failed in Sudan during the time of former President Omar al-Bashir, but Sudanese people say this time they are more hopeful because there is a new government in place. Integrating the former rebels into a new national army and rebuilding the country will cost money. Sudan's government says funding is short after years of sanctions because of being designated as a state sponsor of terrorism. The coronavirus has also caused economic disruption in the country.
Challenges are always there, but what's important is that the peace parties in Sudan are demonstrating a commitment to implementing the peace deal. We are talking to groups that are not yet part of the deal. These things take time, but we are moving in the right direction, and durable peace will return to Sudan soon.
Juba is now urging international donors to support the implementation of Sudan's peace deal. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Let's turn now to the Tigray conflict that flared up in Ethiopia in November 2020. The month-long conflict pushed tensions between the federal government and local Tigray officials to the forefront. There were also fears the conflict would destabilize the region. So much to unpack. Here's CGTN's Girum Chala with the report revisiting the conflict itself and taking a closer look at its regional implications.
It all started after the TPLF Special Force have attacked the barracks of the Northern Command of the Army in the first few days of November. But things were ugly way before this incident, which took place more than a month ago. Ever since Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed took power, the Tigray regional state is said to be defiant of almost all decisions of the government. They in public called the central government weak and staged an election in Tigray without the will of the government here in Addis Ababa. That and other happenings led up to the final military showdown between the Ethiopian army and the ex-Tigray regional state's leadership. War is now over and the hunt for TPLF leaders has continued. However, many still say there is a long way to go before a lasting, unshakable and an all-inclusive peace can be seen in the north. Grumtala CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, time now for a short break, but still ahead on today's special program, Richard takes a look back at security threats on the continent in 2020.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
Welcome back, everyone, to Africa Live. Thanks for staying with us. I'm Richard Nta. Terrorism still remains a big challenge both in the Sahel and parts of the Sahara, and the year 2020 saw a spike in attacks in the region. From Nigeria to Burkina Faso and Mali, terrorists carried out attacks on both state and civilian targets as governments struggle to come up with a lasting solution to the security challenge. Here is CGTN's Deji Badmus with more on that story.
The security situation in the Sahel remains extremely volatile, with jihadis carrying out attacks almost at will. In March, about 98 Chadian soldiers were killed when Boko Haram jihadists attacked their base in the border town of Boma in the western Lac province. In Burkina Faso alone, as of June this year, the UN estimates that 921,000 people have been forced to flee. That's a 92% rise over 2019 figures. In Mali, nearly 240,000 people are internally displaced, most of them women. And in Niger, the number of those who have been forced to flee because of violence is put at 489,000. There seems to be no end in sight to the many security challenges that countries in the Sahel face.
The weak governance structures in almost all the countries of the Sahel. Is it Mali? Is it Niger? Is it the northern part of Nigeria? To an extent, Burkina Faso, Chad. I mean, very weak governance structures. There is no index, on human development that you pick that you will not find that these countries are either at the top of it, or if you are ranking at lower bottom, you find them there. That's one. Then two, the vast nature of the territories. Pick Niger or Mali as an example. These are vast countries. And unfortunately, because of this weak governance structure that I mentioned, monitoring and having surveillance capabilities in these vast areas is almost impossible for these governments.
In Nigeria, despite claims by the government that it has decimated the Boko Haram insurgency, the terror group is still active and carrying out intermittent attacks in the northeast of the country. Millions are still displaced and living in camps. President Muhammadu Buhari is facing mounting pressure even from his own party members of parliament to fire his security chiefs, especially after a recent attack in which 43 rice farmers were slaughtered by Boko Haram terrorists.
Whatever it is that the security chiefs are doing presently is not working, or at least not enough. And if the president insists that the security chiefs are doing their work well, then the logical implication of such assumption is that the president, as the constitutional commander-in-chief of the country, has failed in his most rudimentary assignment of securing this nation.
As 2020 winds down, there's no sign the security challenges in the region will end soon. Terror groups are rapidly expanding their footprints in the region and getting bolder with every attack. And this is despite several ongoing military initiatives to tackle them. Some security experts say leaders of the region may have to come up with a different approach to stop the terrorists in their tracks. Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
As 2020 saw a spike in insurgency attacks in parts of Africa, we caught up with Tulu Akerele, a counter-terrorism, cybersecurity, and data protection consultant, to talk about the challenge of insecurity in Africa.
As we've noticed, there's been a huge migration of terrorism towards the Sahel region, particularly following the shift in power dynamics after the fall of the caliphate in Iraq and Syria. We've noticed there's been a major change to the new creation of a global hub in West Africa. So this new hub of jihadist activity in West Africa has actually led President Macron earlier this year in June to refocus the priorities of the G5 Sahel to combating the Islamic State in Africa, specifically Islamic State in the Greater Sahara. So this was a change in tactic over Al-Qaeda affiliates that they were formerly combating, such as Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal-Muslimin, and of course, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. Now, this G5 Sahel regional cooperation in security is comprised of Burkina Faso, Chad, Niger, Mali, Mauritania, and of course, France. So we've seen this to be extremely effective in pushing back insurgencies and terrorist activities. And actually what we've noticed is ISGS has actually gone down towards West Africa to join the Islamic State in the West African province, whose stronghold is in the Lake Chad Basin region. So if I move towards Nigeria, West Africa, we've seen a nexus of a lot of terrorist actors within Nigeria. We've got obviously Boko Haram factions. We're looking at Ansaru, which is Al-Qaeda aligned and is making a comeback. We've had a recent kidnapping attempt from Ansaru this year. And of course, ISWAP that I mentioned, the Islamic State in the West African province, which has been reinforced and bolstered by ISGS. So we've seen the creation of a lot of civilian joint task forces that have been formed to protect and defend IDP camps, that's internally displaced people camps. The Nigerian military is notoriously understaffed, under-resourced, and underpaid. Soldiers have to buy their own uniform, for example. In previous administrations, we've seen a misappropriation of funds designated to combat terrorism. I've interviewed some soldiers, seen pictures of tanks some years ago. We've seen tanks with no wheels on. So there's a need to really bolster the security efforts. And of course, Nigeria is not just under threat from terrorist actors in the north. We have the Niger Delta issues in the south around oil. We have a rising number of attacks from herdsmen, and of course, increasing levels of banditry throughout northern Nigeria. So it's a lot of threat actors to deal with, and I don't believe the military is resourced enough. There's not enough numbers in the military to combat all these different threats.
Despite intense efforts by concerned countries in the Sahel, violent extremists continue attacks on security forces and civilians while forcibly recruiting children into fighting in Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and Nigeria. We are taking a short break, but when we return, Lindy brings us some of the climate change and environment-related stories of the year 2020.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Taking a look now at how the environment fared in 2020. Well, this year, heavy rains in East and West Africa left many in despair. Floods and landslides left thousands displaced, while hundreds were killed as a result. The damage to infrastructure and property has also been extensive as government struggles to effectively respond to climate catastrophes.
This year, heavy seasonal rains in Sudan caused severe flooding that led to widespread damage to infrastructure and homes. Access to clean water was also cut off, right in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic, exposing many to health risks. The United Nations estimates that more than 830,000 people were affected in all 18 states in the country. The areas most affected were North and West Darfur, Khartoum, Blue Nile and Sinnar. The Interior Minister reported in early September that more than 100 people had died as a result, and a further 50 were injured. Further south in Uganda, the Ministry of Water and Environment reported that by June, floods and subsequent landslides had affected at least 700,000 people nationwide. Most were said to be living illegally in protected zones around lakes and rivers. According to authorities, the settlement and cultivation was a major cause of destruction to the wetlands that normally act as natural sponges to absorb excess rainfall. This was further compounded by the clearing of forests. In western Uganda, 3 rivers burst their banks after torrential rains in early May. 4 people were reported dead and 5,000 others displaced. In the following months until November, the trend continued, with the southwestern and central regions facing similar tragedies. So far in 2020, 64 districts have been affected by flooding and landslide episodes. Over in West Africa, 3 months' worth of rainfall surprised Senegalese in early September. This in turn caused widespread floods, forcing the government to implement an emergency aid plan after only 7 hours of downpour. 11 regions were affected, displacing at least 3,000 people from their homes in the low-lying outskirts of the capital. At least 6 people were reported dead. The incident caused residents to question the actions of authorities in implementing a $1.4 billion plan to protect citizens from rising flooding risks. And finally, in Nigeria, at least 155 people died, and close to 200,000 people were affected by floods that hit the country this year. This is according to reports by the International Federation of the Red Cross. Large tracts of farmland were also washed away with crops, leading to huge losses. The calamity led to the weakening of Nigeria's water supply and infrastructure, with a further threat of disease outbreaks reported. Heavy rains have also been recorded in other countries in the Sahel region, including Niger, Chad and Cameroon. With such environmental tragedies reoccurring, many wonder if it is possible to reverse the effects of poor oversight and degradation in order to be at peace once again with Mother Nature. Mtongana, CGTN.
Well, 2020 also saw one of the largest oil spills in the world after the Japanese ship MV Wakashio crashed into a coral reef in Mauritius. That tragedy led to one of the worst environmental disasters in the country's history. CGTN's Nick Mudimba takes us back to that July 2020 incident, as well as other oil spills in the past.
On the 25th of July 2020, the Japanese bulk carrier MV Wakashio, owned by Nagasaki Shipping, struck a coral reef on Mauritius' southeast coast. The ship was sailing dangerously close to the reef and ran aground. 12 days later, the ship began leaking heavy fuel oil. 200 tons of diesel and 3,900 tons of fuel oil, an estimated 1,000 tons of which leaked into the sea when the ship's hull cracked. The spill left a 15-kilometer stretch of the coastline. The accident occurred near 2 ecologically critical sites, Blue Bay, known for its coral gardens, and Point Diesny, which hosts a fragile mangrove forest critical in the fight against global warming. Heavy winds pushed the oil slick even further along the mainland's shore. The grounded ship split up, releasing more oil in the sea that is home to some of the finest coral reefs and marine protected areas in the world. About 50 melon-headed whales washed up dead off Mauritius at the end of August, infuriating the public, but a link with the spill has not been established. The amount of oil spilled from the Japanese-owned ship is relatively low compared to the big oil spills the world has seen in the past. These are some of the biggest oil spills the world has ever experienced. Gulf War oil spill. The world's largest oil spill was not an accident. It was the result of a war. During Gulf War in 1991, as the Iraqi forces withdrew from Kuwait, they opened pipelines and the valves of oil wells and set the fire as a measure to block the forces of the US from landing in the area. As a result, around 240 million gallons of oil are believed to have been discharged into the Persian Gulf, killing hundreds of fishes and marine mammals. Deepwater Horizon, also known as the Gulf of Mexico oil spill and BP oil spill, the Deepwater Horizon is considered to be the largest oil spill in the petroleum industry's history. The accident also made extensive damages to the marine environment. According to the Center for Biological Diversity, the oil spill killed over 82,000 birds, 25,900 marine mammals, 6,000 sea turtles, and tens of thousands of fish, among others. Ikestock 1 oil well. In June 1979, the Gulf of Mexico saw the collapse of an oil well operated by the Mexican petroleum company Pemex. Around 140 million gallons of oil were discharged into the sea during a 10-month period of time. Atlantic Empress. In July 1979, two oil tankers collided with the Caribbean Sea off the coast of Tobago during a tropical storm. The oil tankers started to leak the cargo and caught fire. According to reports, around 88.3 million gallons of crude oil was discharged into the sea, making the accident the largest ship-sourced oil spill in the world. In addition, the accident claimed the lives of 26 crew members as the Atlantic Empress exploded later. NORA's failed platform. During the Iran-Iraq War in 1983, an oil tanker hit the NORA's field platform situated in the Persian Gulf, leading to a major oil spill. The damage the accident caused to the well resulted in the leaking of oil. It's estimated that about 80 million gallons of oil, around 1,500 barrels a day, flowed into the Persian Gulf during a 7-month period after the accident. Although previous oil spills around the world have not been as environmentally sensitive areas, they have still significantly affected marine animals and plants. Nick Mudimba, CGTN.
Well, let's take a short break. When we return, Africans around the continent tell us about their hopes and expectations for 2021.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Thanks for sticking with us. The year 2020 has been an eventful year, to say the least, but personally, I look forward to a fruitful 2021. Lindy, what are some of the expectations across Africa?
Well, Richard, even though 2020 is coming to an end, the pandemic isn't. So, of course, we're all looking forward to a brighter 2021, but I do believe we have to remain vigilant in the new year. Well, of course, 2020 was indeed tough, but that hasn't stopped Africans across the continent from expressing their expectations for 2021. Let's take a look.
I think it's going to be a tough year. especially for young people and students like myself. We've had a lot of break for the larger part of 2020, a break from academic life especially. So I expect that a lot of students will have to rise up from inertia when it comes to the academic life. But beyond that, personally, I'm expecting for myself 2021 to bring me some more cash, because as a young man, young person who's trying to build a business in a place like Ghana, it's been a bit difficult, and coronavirus sort of destroyed things.
L'année 2020 a été marquée.
The year 2020 was marred around the world by COVID-19, a painful event that shook the world. It shook the world and brought all economies to their knees. This disease has not spared my country, Côte d'Ivoire. I hope that 2021 will be the year of the industrialization, and China is a reference in this area. My hope is that a powerful country like China can help us.
I don't think there's a better way to describe 2020 other than saying it has literally been surreal and pretty much like a science fiction movie. It's been unreal. I don't think anyone could have imagined that anything like this year would happen. And even the best of healthcare systems as we know it was really bearing the brunt of this virus. And it's really been a year that tested the strength of not only the health system but of individuals as well. I think it is something that we can overcome and potentially in the future learn to live with.
We really need to see good things in 2021. There was a lot of crime in our city. Our government must stamp it out next year. We don't want to see it again.
We hope our government will prioritize the improvement of our health care system in 2021. Our leaders should strengthen our health services by building hospitals that meet international standards and schools so that we can have a bright future.
Well, I guess that'll do it for this end of the year special edition of Africa Live.
Indeed. And remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen and follow us on social media. That's all from us here in Nairobi. Thanks for watching our special broadcast, and we wish you all the best for 2021.